All right, Rick, let's look back. This Vikings draft. Prisco, in real time, gave the overall class an A in
Jeez.
2020. And then 3 years later, he gave it a B+. I think after meeting you, he was soured on the idea that this class was as good as he perhaps thought it was. But all right. So at the top of the list, of course, no surprise, Justin Jefferson. Debo, I know I asked you this again, but to refresh your memory, did you want Justin Jefferson at 21 for the Eagles?
No.
Yeah, I did.
No.
I actually was not furious at Jalen Reagor, and I turned out to be completely wrong. But I wanted Jefferson first.
Okay.
The guy that I wanted the most heading into that draft was actually Judy or Ruggs.
Oh, interesting.
And they were both off the board by the time the Eagles and obviously the Vikings picked.
Rick, do you want to give us your cluster of wide receivers, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, the other guy after those guys came off the board and CeeDee Lamb went to Dallas. That was another one that we liked. Reagor, I'll just have to say, the biggest concern was some of the drops that we saw on tape, but he was athletic. And the other thing that we thought, and I think a lot of people thought, that he may have some return skills to also add to his value. But the other guy we really like was Ayuk, who was coming out to Arizona State. I think played 1 year at Arizona State. You can see the athletic traits. He reminded me a little bit of Stephon Diggs's body movement and route running ability. He had a lot of technical things to work with, but athletically, I thought he had some similar traits to that. Even I went back a little bit back in the day when I was in Miami, and Chris Chambers in him, just on length and his ability to adjust to the ball. So we liked Ayuk was up in that mix with those receivers as well for us.
Just thinking back about Chris Chambers when I was younger, my memory is he wasn't necessarily tall, but he had really long arms is how he played, it felt like.
Extremely long arms. Didn't have a lot of production coming out of Wisconsin. Then had a couple of really good years for us down in Miami.
Yeah. No, I liked Brandon Ayuk as well. And so you weren't surprised at all. I believe the 49ers traded up for him to get him at the bottom of the first round. So that didn't surprise you in the least.
No, not at all.
Gotcha. All right. And then, and Debo notes here, Vikings, you had traded Stephon Diggs on March 20th as well. So you had wide receiver, obviously, at the top of the to-do list. And you can actually read, I think in The Athletic, you did a breakdown of how the Stephon Diggs trade came about. And that was an interesting read. Is that The Athletic?
I don't know.
You just answer the phone and answer questions.
Just answer the phone and answer questions.
Yeah, but it felt like
I think it was The Athletic. Yeah, they did a great job with that story.
Yeah, and it seemed like both sides were professional, and you were able to accommodate them. And I'll just ask you, how often does an agent or a player? I would imagine typically it's the agent that lets you know a player wants to be traded, or does a player ever initiate that conversation?
It's usually through the agent.
So does that happen once a week, once a month, once a season? Or
depends on the play time, and you deal with it all the time. It's not first or the last.
All right, and your second first-round pick was Jeff Gladney, the cornerback, who sadly has passed away. Was cornerback definitely a need there, or it was just a matter of the cluster?
We were looking to add another corner, especially a guy that we felt would have the ability to play in our scheme from a Knicks standpoint. And he had a pretty good first year. Unfortunately, he had some issues, and he's passed away. So, but we thought that he had a legitimate chance because I thought he was a pretty good corner down at TCU. Really good.
Undersized, but incredibly tough, and he played much bigger than his size when he was on the field. Ezra Cleveland was your second round pick, and you gave me a hard time about Blake Freeland, but they're similar type players in that they're long and they needed to add weight. So does that mean you really like Blake Freeland?
Well, Cleveland was a little more athletic than Blake Freeland, in my opinion. Freeland to me was more of a right tackle, but may potentially move inside the guard. But Ezra, we were in that outside zone scheme and with Gary Kubiak. So they were looking at these leaner athletic linemen that would fit the scheme better. And he checked all the boxes from fitting that athletic standpoint that we moved into guard.
And then you got Cam Dantzler. I remember watching him, Mississippi State, right?
Yes.
Long, he didn't run a 4.3, but I thought he was pretty physical. And you drafted him, I would imagine, backup in mind, but perhaps some ability to start.
Yeah, and he had some games where he was a legit starter, and then had some durability issues. So I think he was claimed by the Commanders, and I think he was just let go.
Oh, I didn't know that. So they just let him go recently. DJ Wanham was the next pick in the 4th round. And I'll go through a couple of these 4th-round picks, and you can highlight any of the names you want. James Lentz, the defensive tackle out of Baylor, and Troy Dye, the linebacker out of Oregon, I believe, right?
Yeah, all guys that we felt were great depth for us. Like DJ can add as pass rusher. James Lynch had an incredible, productive career at Baylor, rushing the passer. We bulked him up and put him inside as a nose tackle, tough as nails kid. Troy Dye was an undersized, athletic linebacker. A lot of these guys, when we looked at them, when you're adding on Saturdays. We always looked at their ability to potentially help us on special teams and guys that had some unique traits that we could try to develop.
And if you're watching on YouTube, you see a comment from our good buddy Will Brinson. Remember the old Pick Six podcast? I think he's joking, but it could be serious. Rick, did Mike Zimmer's contract include a demand to draft a cornerback in the first 2 rounds every single year?
We never had enough corners.
Is that straight from Mike?
That's pressures. That was a lot of coaches.
How much I've talked to people when we talk like to the Alabama players, for example, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they say that Nick Saban is very much involved. Xavier McKinney in particular said, as a defensive backs coach, his training, Nick Saban, he was always involved and yelling and screaming at what he wanted to happen. Was Mike Zimmer that way in terms of what was going on defensively?
Yeah, very good, unbelievable defensive-minded coach. Very good with corners, had a lot of success with a lot of DBs, and he was pretty hands-on with the secondary and trying to develop these guys.
All right. So interestingly, Harrison Hand, 5th round cornerback, and then KJ Osborne, which turned out to be a really good pick. I'm just looking at the draft as it unfolded in real time here. 3 picks before the Bears got Darnell Mooney. Was Darnell Mooney on your list? Or again, you say this all the time, you're sort of throwing darts.
No, KJ, again, this is where the coaches come into play, and they do a lot of work, and we try to collaborate together, personnel and coaches. I remember Gary Kubiak really liked KJ Osborne, not only because he was a transfer from Buffalo that went to Miami of Florida, and then seeing he had some return skills, but he was built more like a running back, and Gary was looking for a big slot receiver, and KJ had a lot of upside, and I think he's still continuing to develop, but has won a lot of games for us and made a lot of big plays as a third option behind Thielen and Justin.
I'm looking at the wide receivers drafted just before I mentioned Darnell Mooney. He's obviously had a good career so far. And then the next wide receivers drafted, Donovan Peoples-Jones has had some success in Cleveland. Quez Watkins has had some success in Philadelphia. James Prochet along that path in Baltimore. So there were a lot of wide receivers drafted late that made an impact. All right, I want to ask you about Nate Stanley, the quarterback there you took in the 7th round. Now, we saw this draft with Tanner McKee, who came out of Stanford and was drafted by the Eagles. He doesn't fit athletically what the quarterbacks look like. I would imagine you would like the quarterback to fit what you're doing there. So Kirk Cousins and Nate Stanley, are you thinking he has a chance to win the backup job? Or are you thinking we want him to run the scout team? Or are you just thinking, let's see what happens?
You're hoping because I think who was our backup quarterback then? Sean that was Mannion with Kubiak. So Nate was a guy that we wanted to kind of put on practice squad and just kind of see how he developed.
All right. Any of those picks stick out to you, like the day 3 picks that you thought was an absolute surprise in terms of how quickly they helped the team, and maybe you didn't think it would be that quick? You're taking a flyer on them, it works out, one of those situations?
Yeah, Josh Metellus probably didn't run as fast. That was the hard-hitting safety out of Michigan. But he's became a really, really good special teams player. And even last year when he had to start a couple games, these are the guys that if you got to play with them for 3 or 4 games, they hold up. They're not going to cost you games, But like I said, their value comes on special teams, and Josh Metellus to me is one of the top special teams players in the league.
No, it's an important point. I remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl before everything shut down for COVID, and thinking, okay, he's just a guy. He's doing okay. He's not doing great, but it's more than just a week of practice. It's more than just running sprints of the combine. It's the how does it fit in your offense or your defense in this case? How does he fit in the locker room? What type of person is he? And all those sorts of things. So that's a perfect example of just that. All right, Rick.